Aristotle was the first political scientist in the world. He introduced the empirical observations into the study of politics. Aristotle considered democracy as the worst form of government. Aristotle is known as the father of political science. His famous books are Politics. He elaborated the ideas such as ideal state. Cleisthenes is known as the father of democracy. It is a supreme law that determines the relationship among the citizens and its country, and also the relationship between the people and the government. Aristotle is the father of political science, and Cleisthenes is known as the father of democracy. It is a set of written rules that are accepted by all the people living together in a country. There are certain events in the British rule that laid down the legal framework for the organization and functioning of the government and administration in British India. These events have generally influenced our constitution and polity. They are explained here in a chronological order under two major headings. The Company Rule 1773 to 1858, then the Crown Rule 1858 to 1947. B.C. Rawat, one of the famous historian, categorized the Indian constitution framework in the following stages: 1600 to 1700 East India Company Rule, 1773 to 1858 1600 to 1773 East India Company Rule, 1773 to 1858 Charter Acts, 1858 to 1909 Council Acts, 1909 to 1935 British India Acts, 1935 to 1947 1947 India Independence Act, 1947 to 1950 Constituent Assembly. So first stage is 1600 to 1773. 1600 to 1773 East India Company Rule. Arrival of the British and the establishment of the British East India Company was the outcome of Portuguese traders Vasco da Gama, who earns enormous profit by selling their merchandise in India. East India Company was formed in 1599 through the Royal Charter from Queen Elizabeth I on December 31st, 1600 AD. British Achinru and was outcome of the Portuguese trader Vasco da Gama 1498, who earned enormous profits by selling their merchandise in India. The East India Company was formed in 1599 through the Royal Charter from Queen Elizabeth I on December 31st, 1600 AD, authorizing it to trade in the East. And East India Company was formed in 1599 through the Royal Charter from the Queen Elizabeth I on December 31st, like Christmas vacation, that December 31, 1600 AD, authorizing it to trade in the East. Subsequently, in the 1608 AD, East India Company sent Captain William Hawkins to the court of the Mughal Emperor Jahangir to secure the royal patronage. He succeeded in getting the royal permit for the company to establish its factories at various places on the western coast of India. In 1615 AD, Sir Thomas Roe was sent by Emperor James I of England to Jahangir's court with a plea for more concession for the company. Roe was very diplomatic and thus successfully secured a royal charter giving the company freedom to trade for the whole of the Mughal territory. In 1662 AD, when Charles II of England married a Portuguese princess Catherine, that is, Sir Thomas Roe was sent by Emperor James I of England to Jahangir's court with a plea for more concession for the company. Roe was very diplomatic and thus successfully secured a royal charter giving the company freedom to trade in the whole of the Mughal territory. He was very diplomatic. Roe was very diplomatic and thus successfully secured a royal charter giving the company freedom to trade in the whole of the Mughal territory. Secured a royal charter giving the company freedom to trade in whole of the Mughal territory. In 1662 AD, when Charles II of England married, when Charles II of England married a Portuguese prince, Catherine. Oh, sorry, I have to change this, right? Subsequently, in 1615 AD, 1662 AD, when Charles II of England married a Portuguese princess Catherine. In 1662 AD, when Charles II of England married Portuguese princess Catherine and received the island of Bombay under a dowry, which he immediately gave it to the East India Company for in 1668 AD. 1662 marriage, 1668 AD he given AD for £10 per year. The company on the west coast shifted its business headquarters from Surat to Mumbai in 1639 AD. East India Company obtained the lease of a city of the Madras from the local king, where it built Fort St. George to protect its factory. Later, Madras was made South Indian headquarters of the company. The governor of Bengal, Shujauddaulah, in 1651 AD, allowed the East India Company to carry out its trade activities in Bengal. That is, the governor of Bengal, Shujauddaulah, in 1651 AD, allowed the East India Company to carry out its trade activities in the Bengal. A factory in Hooghly was established, and 3 villages, Sultanati, Govindpur, and Kolkata, were purchased in 1698 AD by the company to build the factory over there, and subsequently Fort William was raised in order to provide protection around the factory. In Hooghly, near Hooghly, these 3. And in already 1651 lo Shujauddaulah, governor of Bengal, Shujauddaulah, gave permission to the East India Company to carry out its trade activities in Bengal. So that was then it was the Mughal Emperor Farrukh Siyar, which in 1717 AD issued a royal Farman charter. It was a Mughal Emperor Farrukh Siyar which in 1717 AD issued a royal Farman charter granting the company important trading facilities in Bengal, which included the permission of export and import of British goods in Bengal without paying taxes. Under the Farman, the company was authorized to issue dastaks, passes for the transportation of the goods. So, in ensuing years, the East India Company further expanded its base and flourished through also faced challenges from the Portuguese, Dutch, and French. Major and minor conflicts among them often took place from time to time for commercial and political supremacy. But in the end, it were the British who proved themselves most powerful after thrashing other 3 and remained in India for more than 200 years as a ruling power. By the 1750s, East India Company started interfering in the Indian political issues. In 1757, Robert Clive defeated the powers of Nawab of Bengal, Sirajuddaulah, the Battle of Plassey. 1757, Robert Clive, Nawab of Bengal, Sirajuddaulah, at the Battle of Plassey. In 1764, Battle of Buxar was fought. Battle of Buxar, 1764 Battle of Buxar was fought between the forces of a command of the British East India Company led by Thomas Hector Munro and combined armies of Mir Qasim, the Nawab of Bengal, Nawab of Awadh, Shujauddaulah, and the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II, accompanied by Raja Balwant Singh of Kashi. It was a decisive victory for the British East India Company. In 1765, with the Treaty of Allahabad, the Battle of Buxar came to an end, and the company, which till now had purely trading functions, has obtained the Diwani rights over the revenue and civil justice of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. This started its career as a territorial power. In 1772, Warren Hastings introduced a collector system in India to collect the revenue. The company ruled 1773 to 1858. Second stage, 1773 to 1858 Charter Acts. There are 7 Charter Acts like 1773 Regulating Act, 1781 Settlement Act, 1784 Pitt's India Act, 1793 Charter Act, 1813 Charter Act, 1833 Charter Act, 1853 Charter Act. Reasons for passing the Regulating Act. The East India Company was in severe financial crisis and had a task of a loan of £1 million. East India Company was in severe financial crisis and had asked a loan of £1 million for British government in 1772. Allegations of corruption. £1 million from British government appu. Severe financial crisis. Allegations of corruption and nepotism were rampant against the company officials. There was a terrible famine in Bengal where a huge population perished. The dual form of administration instituted by the Robert Clive was complex and drawing a lot of complaints. According to the system, the company had both Diwani rights obtained by the Battle of Buxar in Bengal, and also Nawab had Nizamat rights, judicial and policing functions as secured from the Mughal Emperor. In reality, both the powers are vested with the company. The farmers and the general population suffered as their improvement was neglected, and the company was only concerning the maximizing their revenue. So this dual form of administration by Robert Clive was one of the concern, and terrible famine that has perished human population, corruption allegations, severe financial crisis, lawlessness in Bengal, the defeat of the company against the Mysore Hyder Ali in 1769. The company though earlier chartered had only been given the trading rights by the British Parliament. Slowly and slowly, it started acquiring more and more territory. It started acting like a ruling body. And there in England, the British Parliament couldn't swallow this situation, and to put an end to this tendency of the company that is using the political powers in the name of the trading rights, the company thought it was necessary that these territories should be brought under the control of the Crown. Thus came the Regulating Act of 1773. This act was of great constitutional importance. The Regulating Act was introduced by the then British Prime Minister Lord Frederick North in the British Parliament on 18th May 1773. The Regulating Act is said to be the first written constitution of the India. It was kept by the British government. It was taken up by the British government to control and regulate the affairs of the East India Company in India. It recognized for the first time political and administrative functions of the company. It has laid the foundations of the central administration in India. It designated the Governor of Bengal as a Governor General of Bengal. This act had a great constitutional importance. The Regulating Act, which was introduced by the then Prime Minister Lord Frederick North in the British Parliament on 18th May 1773. The Regulating Act is said to be the first written constitutional law of India. It was taken up by the British government to control and regulate the affairs of the East India Company in India. It recognized for the first time the political and administrative functions of the company. It laid down the foundations of central administration in India. It designated the Governor of Bengal as Governor General of Bengal. Warren Hastings became the first Governor General of Bengal. An executive council was established with 1+4 members to assist the Governor General of the Bengal, and office tenure of each member is 5 years. It subordinated the government of Bombay and government of Madras to the Governor General of the Bombay. Supreme Court was established at Fort William, Calcutta, as an apex court in 1774, comprising of 1 Chief Justice and 3 other judges. The first Chief Justice of Supreme Court was Sir Elijah Impey, and the supporting judges, helping other 3 judges are called John Hide, Robert Chambers, Caesar Lamister. It prohibited the servants of the company from engaging in any private trade or accepting any bribes from the natives. It strengthened the control of the British government over the company by requiring the Court of Directors, the governing body of the company, to report on its revenue, civil and military affairs in India. Okay. Defects of the Regulating Act of 1773. The major drawback of the Regulating Act of 1773 are: the Governor General has no veto power. It did not address the concerns of the Indian people who were paying the revenues to the company. It did not stop the corruption and of the company officials. Supreme Court's power and jurisdiction was not clearly defined. Parliamentary control over the control that was sought in the activities of the company proved to be ineffective, as there was no mechanism to review or study the reports sent by the Governor General in Council. And also Settlement Act of 1781. The circumstances that led to the passing of the act are: a lot of criticisms of administration of the Warren Hastings rose. Settlement Act of 1781. A lot of criticisms of administration of Warren Hastings has rose. There was a big tussle between the Supreme Court and the Governor General in Council, which disturbed the balance of administration to a great extent. There was an interference in the personal laws of the communities, which had agitated the people. In the year 1777, a complaint was made by the Court of Directors against the Supreme Court. As per them, it was difficult to run the administration. To address this complaint, the House of Commons appointed a committee known as a Touchet Committee to do an inquiry about the administration in the Bengal, Bihar and Orissa. The report of this committee led to the enactment of a Act of Settlement 1781, or a Declaratory Act of 1781, to remove the defects of the Regulating Act of 1773. Objectives of the Act of 1781: to remove the ambiguity regarding the few provisions of the Regulating Act and Charter Act which had created the divisions between the court and the government, to support the lawful government of the Bengal, Bihar and Orissa so that the revenue could be collected smoothly. To support the lawful government of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa so that the revenue could be collected smoothly, to maintain and protect the laws and customs of the native people. Okay, native people. Features of the Settlement Act of 1781. It exempted the Governor General and the Council from the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court for the acts done by him in his official capacity. Similarly, it exempted the servants of the company and the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court for their official actions. It excluded the revenue matters and the matters arising in collection of revenue from the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. It provided that the Supreme Court was to have jurisdiction over all the inhabitants of the Calcutta. It also required the court to administer the personal laws of the dependents, that is, Hindus were to be tried according to the Hindu law and Muslims were to be tried according to the Muhammadan law. It laid down that the appeals from the provincial courts could be taken by the Governor General in Council and not to the Supreme Court. It empowered the Governor General in Council to frame regulations for the provincial courts and councils. That is, it empowered the Governor General in Councils to frame the regulations to the provincial courts and councils. And also it laid down that the appeals from the provincial courts could be taken only by the Governor General in Council and not the Supreme Court. It was the first attempt to separate the executive from the judiciary by defining the respective areas of the jurisdiction. So that is about the features of this act. And Pitt's India Act of 1784. To rectify the defects of the Regulating Act of 1773 and the Settlement Act of 1781, the British Parliament has passed this act. It was introduced in the British Parliament by the then Prime Minister William Pitt Jr. What are the features of this act? It distinguished the commercial and political functions of the company. It distinguished between the commercial and political functions of the company. It allowed the Court of Directors to manage the commercial affairs but created a new body called Board of Control to manage the political affairs. Thus, it established a system of double government. The Board of Directors comprised of 6 members. Among them, one is a State Secretary, that is 1 plus 5. The Board of Directors comprised of 6 members, 1 plus 5. Among them, one is a State Secretary. It empowered the Board of Control to supervise and direct all the It empowers the Board of Control to supervise and operate all the civil and military government over the revenues of the British possessions in India. It reduced the council's members from 3 to 4, from 4 to 3. 1 plus 4 unde, 1 plus 3 unde. Plus also Governor General was also given the veto power. Thus, the significance of this act for 2 reasons. The company territories in India were first time called as British possessions in India. British government was given the supreme control over the company's affairs and its administration in India. Act of 1786. In 1786, Lord Cornwallis was appointed as the Governor General of Bengal. He placed 2 demands to accept the post. One is he should be given the power to override the decision of his council in special cases. He would also be in the Commander-Chief. Accordingly, Act of 1786 was enacted to make in the provisions that is Commander-in-Chief also he should be. Charter Act of 1793. It extended the company's trade monopoly in India for another 20 years. The company's dividends were allowed to be raised to 10%. The salaries of the staff and the Board of Work Control were to be charged on the company. After all the expenses the company had to pay to the British government was nearly 5 lakh per annum. Per yearly you had to pay 5 lakh British pounds. From the Indian revenue annually. The company was granted the authority to grant the licenses to the company was given the authority to grant licenses and individual. The company was granted the authority to grant the licenses to the individual and to the company employees. To the individuals and to the company employees to carry on trade in India. This was known as privilege or country trade. This led to the shipments of opium to the China. It extended the overriding power given to the Lord Cornwallis over his council to all the future Governor Generals and Governors of the presidencies. It gave Governor General more powers and control over the government of the subordinate presidencies of Bombay and Madras. In the Governor General's absence from Bengal, he could appoint any vice president from among the civilian members of his council. So once again we will see the Charter Act of 1793. It extended the company's trade monopoly for another 20 more years. The company's dividends were raised to 10%. The salaries of the staff and the Board of Control were to be charged to the company. Now charged to on the company after all the expenses. The company had to pay the company had to pay to the British government was annually 5 lakh British pounds per annum. The company was granted the authority to grant licenses. The company was given authority to grant licenses and to individuals and company employees to carry on trade in India. This was also known as privilege or country trade. The authority to the individuals and the company employees to carry on the trade in India. This was known as a privilege or a country trade. This led to the shipment of opium to the China. It extended the overriding power of Cornwallis over his council to all the future governor generals and governors of presidencies. It gave the governor general more powers and control over the governments of the Bengal and Madras, presidencies of Bombay and Madras. Subordinate presidencies. In the Governor General's absence of Bengal, he could be appointed vice president from among the civilian members of his council. Charter Act of 1813. It extended the company's trade monopoly in India for another 20 years. This act is known as East India Company Act of 1813. It established the trade monopoly of the company in India, that is, Indian trade was thrown open. It abolished the trade monopoly of the company in India. The Indian trade was thrown open to all the British merchants. However, it continued the monopoly of the company over trade in tea and trade with China. Salaries, expenses, privileges been given. However, it continued the monopoly of the company over trade in tea and trade with China. It asserted the sovereignty of the British Crown over the company's territories in India. 1 lakh rupees per annum was been allocated for the spread of education. 1 lakh rupees per annum has been allocated for the spread of this education in India. Through this act, it allowed the Christian missionaries to come to India for the purpose of enlightening the people. It also provided for the spread of Western education among the inhabitants of the British territories in India. It authorized the local governments to India to impose taxes on persons. They could also punish if persons are not paying taxes. It facilitated training to the civil services. The company's dividends was raised to 10.5%. The act gave more powers of the civil courts. The act gave more powers for the civil. The act gave more powers to the courts in India over the European British subjects. So what it is again, Charter Act of 1813 చూసుకుంటే it extended the company's monopoly for 20 more years. This act is also known as East India Company Act of 1813. It abolished the trade monopoly of the company in India. Indian trade was thrown open to all other British merchants. However, it continued the monopoly in trade in tea and trade with China. It asserted that the sovereignty of the British Crown over the company. It asserted that the sovereignty of the British Crown over the company's territories in India. 1 lakh rupees has been allocated for the spread of education in India through this act. It also allowed the Christian missionaries to come to India for the purpose of enlightening the people. It provided for the spread of Western education among the inhabitants of the British territories in India. It authorized the local governments in India to impose taxes on persons. They could also punish the persons for not paying They could also punish the government for not paying taxes. The company's dividend was fixed at 10.05%. The act gave more powers for the courts in India over the European British subjects. It facilitated training to the Indian civil servants. Charter Act of 1833. The Charter Act of 1833 was passed in the British Parliament which renewed the East India Company's charter for another 20 years. This was also called as Government of India Act of 1833 or Saint Helena Act of 1833. The company's trade links even with China were also closed down. Act permitted the English to settle freely in India. The Governor General of Bengal was redesignated as Governor General of India and vested him all the civil and military administrative powers. Thus the country's administration was under unified control. Lord William Bentinck was the first Governor General of India. So Charter Act of 1833 was passed in the British Parliament which renewed the East India Company's charter for another 20 years. This was also called as Government of India Act of 1833 or Saint Helena Act of 1833. The company's trade links with China was also abolished. The act permitted the English to settle freely in India. The company China తో కూడా ట్రేడ్ అబాలిష్ అయిపోయింది 20 years. The act permitted the English to settle freely in India. The act permitted the English to settle freely in India. This act permitted the English to settle freely in India. The Governor General of Bengal was redesignated as Governor General of India and vested him all the civil and military power. Thus, the country's administration was unified under one control. Okate control. That was Lord William Bentinck was the first Governor General of India. It deployed the legislative powers of the Governor of Bombay and Governor of Madras, and the Governor General of India was given the legislative powers over the entire British India. In the civil and military affairs of the company, the civil and military affairs of the company were controlled by the Governor General in Council. For the first time, the Governor General's government was called as Government of India, and the council was known as Indian Council. This was with this law, it would increase the number of members of the Governor's Executive Council. For the first time, the Governor General's government was called Government of India, and the council was called as Indian Council. With this law, it would increase the number of members of the Governor's Executive Council from 3 to 4. That is, 1 plus 4 ఉండే ఇంతకుముందు 1 plus 4 నుంచి 1 plus 3కి వేసిండు. ఇప్పుడు 1 plus 3 నుంచి 1 plus 4కి పెంచిండు ఒకటి. Who is added? Appointed a legal member is added. That is, with this law, it would increase the number of members of the Governor's Executive Council from 3 to 4 and appoint a legal member. As per the Act, Indian Law Commission was established. First chairman of the Law Commission was Lord Macaulay. For the independent India, first Law Commission chairman was M.C. Setalvad. The present Law Commissioner chairman was B.S. Chauhan, 21st Law Commissioner. The laws made under the previous acts were called as regulations, and while the laws made under this acts were called as acts. సో ఈ చార్టర్ యాక్టర్స్ ఏంటి యాక్ట్ అంటారు. ఇంకో 20 years పొడిగించిండ్రు. ఇంకా 20 years పెంచిండ్రు. ట్రేడ్ లింక్స్ విత్ చైనా ఫట్ అయిపోయినాయి. యాక్ట్ పర్మిటెడ్ ఇంగ్లీష్ టు సెటిల్. गवर्नर जनरल ऑफ इंडिया अंटारू. सेंट्रलाइज्ड एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव लेजिस्लेटिव पावर छीन लिया और सेंटर में दे दिया. सिविल एंड मिलिट्री अफेयर्स विद गवर्नर जनरल इन काउंसिल. फर्स्ट टाइम गवर्नर जनरल गवर्नमेंट इज कॉल्ड एज इंडियन गवर्नमेंट एंड द काउंसिल इज नोन एज इंडियन काउंसिल. लॉ मेंबर्स काउंसिल स्ट्रेंथ 1+3 to 1+4. लॉ कमीशन लॉर्ड मेकाले. Independence India. First Law Commission M.C. Setalvad. 21st Law Commission B.S. Chauhan. Laws made under the previous acts were called as regulations, and the laws made under this act were known as acts. Charter Act. It ended the regulations. The name of acts under. Okay. It ended the activities of the East India Company as a commercial body, while it became a purely administrative body. This act first time introduced a system of open competition for Indians for selection of civil servants, but it was negated by the after opposition of the Court of Directors. It ended the activities of the East India Company as a commercial body, which is a purely administrative body. This act for the first time introduced a system of open competition for Indians for selection of civil services, but it was negated by the Court of Directors. So ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी पूरा कमर्शियल बॉडी से एक एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव बॉडी बन गया. East India Company provided Indians with the first opportunity, that is abolition of racism in the local government, in the government employment. On the advice of Rajaram Mohan Rai, Lord William Bentinck introduced the English education system in India in 1835 with the help of Lord Macaulay. So this is all about the till the Charter Act of 1833.